Might there be a way to get Supreme Court Justice Beerbong Wienerweaver out of office without going through the Senate's impeachment process? Check this out. And be sure to ding the bell, leave your comments, subscribe to our channel, and share it with your friends. Donald Trump had a phone conversation, apparently. This is, all leaked information, but appears to be fairly solid. He had a phone conversation with a foreign leader in which he made a promise. That promise so flipped out somebody in the intelligence community, whether they were monitoring the foreign leader or Trump, we don't know. Whether they were a translator or a spy, we don't know. But that person was so flipped out that they went to the inspector general of the intelligence community and said, I want to file a whistleblower complaint, which, by the way, is typically a career ender. I mean, this is something that somebody really went out on the edge, went out on a limb for. And that the inspector general then before, this was... They notified the Director of National Intelligence. It was supposed to be passed along to Congress to evaluate. And the Trump White House is absolutely stonewalling there. This is another cover-up coming out of the Trump White House. But we don't know what they're covering up. So we've been basically speculating on what it might be, which, of course, Trump's behavior, particularly when he tweets this morning, hey, nothing to see here. Just keep going. No droids in this car, sort of adds to the speculative fervor. So I've been taking your calls for the last hour about who do you think it might be and what do you think was said. I have my own theories, which I have shared, and we'll get back to that. What kind of treason did Donald Trump commit and with whom in just a few minutes. I also have a remarkable story about UFOs I wanted to share with you, which seems like it's totally, off topic, but actually it's not. But right now, Ian Millhiser, our old buddy, he is now a senior correspondent at Vox, and he's the author of the book Injustices, the court's history of comforting the comfortable and afflicting the afflicted. But he wrote a brilliant piece that you can find at Vox.com. It's titled, Can We Remove Justice Kavanaugh Without Impeachment? His Twitter handle, by the way, is iMillhiser, Millhiser. Ian, welcome back to the program.
It's good to be here. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Ian. Nice talking with you. So how might we be able to get Justice Kavanaugh, I refer to him as Justice Beerbong Wienerweaver, off the Supreme Court without going through the United States Senate in an impeachment hearing? Or for that matter, the House. I mean, it would have to start there.
Yeah. So, the short answer is it's a heavy lift, and it rests on a legal theory that is untested, but, as I was reading the article laying this out, it seems surprisingly plausible. So there are two law professors, conservative law professors, actually, who wrote an article several years back, way before anyone knew who Christine Blasey Ford was, which argued that if you read the Constitution, it says that judges shall serve during good behavior.
Right. And that's right there in Article 3.
That term, right. It's right there in Article 3. And their argument is that term, during good behavior, does not mean unless they're impeached. What it means, they claim, is that a judge can be removed through a judicial process. And that could be, if they're convicted of certain crimes, it's automatic. It could be if they're shown that, they just don't show up to work. There could conceivably be a judicial process that removes them. But, the idea is that impeachment isn't the only way. It could also be done through a judicial process. And so their argument is that Congress, and this is the sort of thing that really could only happen if Democrats have an extraordinarily strong year in 2020, could pass a law. It could say, for example, that if a federal judge is convicted of perjury, then they are automatically stripped of their judicial office. And then the question would be, could the Justice Department obtain a conviction against a particular judge, in order to trigger the statute?
And this is based on the assumption that when Kavanaugh protested his innocence before the United States Senate, he was lying, that he committed perjury.
Right. And, the standard for perjury is very high. So, I don't want to leave your listeners thinking this would be an easy thing to do. There are a lot of untested questions here. It's based on, again, this article, which lays out some pretty compelling evidence. The most compelling evidence that they lay out is in 1790. So we're talking about the first Congress, the one that had James Madison in it, passed a law saying that judges who are convicted of bribery are automatically disqualified from ever holding federal office again. And so the argument is that if bribery, if the first Congress, many of the people who were in the first Congress actually wrote the Constitution, thought that it was okay to say that upon a conviction, a judge is automatically removed, then it follows that, maybe they were onto something. They knew something about the Constitution. And so another Congress could do something similar in the future.
Is that law still on the books?
I don't believe it is. I mean, I would actually have to go back and look at it. But the federal criminal law has been rewritten many times between, since 1790.
Sure. It's a fascinating theory, and I think, applying things to federal judges is certainly within the purview of Congress. I mean, Article 3, Section 2 is pretty clear about that. So, which would include the Supreme Court. So I think it's fascinating. Have you gotten any feedback from any constitutional scholars on their thoughts on the viability of this?
I mean, I've gotten a little bit of feedback. I mean, the thing about it is, there's really two questions here. I mean, the first question, and I think it's a hard one, is yes, there's this strong argument that in 1790 this is what people believed, but do we really want to say that 200 years of of uncontested practice should be thrown out the window because some clever law professors, dig up some historical documents? Right. And most of the time, I think the answer to that question should be no. I mean, right. You've got some very dangerous people on the Supreme Court who think that the answer to that question should always be yes. And that's how you wind up with things like, child labor laws getting struck down. Right. So I think that, we should tend to be cautious of those arguments. That's the one hard question. And then the second hard question, probably the hardest question, is would the judiciary let this happen? Do federal judges who ultimately would rule on the constitutionality of something, do they want to make themselves more vulnerable in this way? In other words,
would the Supreme Court strike this down as being unconstitutional?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I mean, I could see a circumstance where the Supreme Court might think that this would be a good idea, and that would be if Kavanaugh, if a member of the Supreme Court were actually convicted of a crime and was sent to prison. I could see the federal court say, the spectacle of having this guy rule on cases while he is incarcerated is more than I think.
Well, historically, haven't judges who've been convicted of crimes, and I know there have been a number of them just in the last decade or so, mostly at the state level, maybe a few at the federal level, basically they always resign, it seems.
Yeah, most of the time they have the decency to resign. When they don't have the decency to resign, they are frequently impeached and they are removed that way. So typically it's not an issue. Because, a judge who is behind bars, typically doesn't remain a judge very long.
So maybe they should go after Kavanaugh anyway for perjury, even if there's not a law saying that he has to be removed from office, and just shame him into resigning.
I mean, it's possible. Now, I mean, the question, even assuming, and again, it's a really high bar to get a perjury conviction, right. But even assuming that you could get that conviction, the issue here is that this isn't just about Brett Kavanaugh. It's about the swing seat on the Supreme Court. Right. And, is Brett Kavanaugh, who has spent his entire career as a Republican partisan, going to give up his seat if a Democrat is in the White House, knowing it would flip the Supreme Court? Or for that matter, are Republican senators going to vote to convict him in an impeachment process, no matter what the evidence says, when they know that the consequence could be a Democratic majority on the Supreme Court?